I apologize for the delays on food. We were supposed to have more here, and it's on its way. So we will have more coming, I promise you that. One of the things we're also going to do is, because we know we won't get to everything we want to get to, we are going to give all the candidates in the future a questionnaire, and if they fill it back and return it to us, we will post all those results on our website. We'll be giving the candidates homework. Next question, we'll be giving a minute and 30 seconds to answer. We'll be starting with Rashida Tlaib. Our political system is heavily dependent on raising money. Members of Congress have been known to work half their time and the other half spending in a cubicle making calls to donors. So when Ian Conyers, for instance, mentions that they might be talking about going back to part-time, they're only working part-time literally for us now. So, do we need campaign finance laws, and how would you reform them?
Absolutely. I can tell you, as someone that has been very much opposed to Citizens case that passed and Citizens United, I do not believe corporations are people, and that should never ever have passed. And I'm somebody that's been working very, very hard organizing around the movement to repeal that. I can tell you, me and a number of people like Congressman Keith Ellison and others truly believe in having a public campaign finance reform, basically allowing there to be funding from the public sector into, that way there's not a lot of influence and so forth. I have been blessed that I've been able to raise on a grassroots level similar to, like President Obama and others because of the historic nature of me getting elected. But I know for so many of my former colleagues and others, even in the state legislature, it was very difficult. But I'm very much in support of looking at that avenue of having the public sector be able to fund congressional races, and that's been something that I know Senator Bernie Sanders has been promoting and others, and that's something that I absolutely would probably definitely vote for.
So I support, public financing of our system as well for campaigns. I think that it's something that we see in other nations, other Western nations. It's something certainly that needs to be debated and studied, and I would commit to doing that, and also finding partners in the Congress who understand that. The irony of this question is literally, as I was pulling into the parking lot, a young African-American woman running for state rep called me and asked me for some advice on fundraising. And I said, honey, that's not my area. That's not where I'm great. But I explained to her just some studies and some things that I've read, and I let her know first, you're not the only one in the country, the only woman of color that's dealing with this and that is facing this challenge. Historically, for us as women of color, for a long time we've been running for office, but it was getting the funding and the financing to be able to be elected was the issue. So I guess, my word of encouragement to her, and my word of encouragement, I guess, to this group and to myself, because I'm ministering to me right now, is to step up. The first thing I said to her was, I'm gonna write you a check. I'm gonna sow a seed because I believe in what it is that you're standing for. And I know that it takes money in order to get you to the leadership table. And so I guess, I absolutely support making sure that I support in studying an avenue regarding public financing of campaigns. But what I know that we can control immediately is, as folks who are everyday people, putting our money where our mouth is, sowing a seed into what it is you believe in, and doing the work, whether it's financially, whether it's through your work, your deeds, your volunteering. It costs money and it takes effort to be able to get elected. It's not that we're not running in many instances, particularly women of color. It's that we don't raise the revenue to get in the room. But if we work together and stand together and then empower each other with our votes, then there's nothing that we can't do. Thank you.
First thing that we need to do is we need to overturn the Citizens United decision. The second thing we need to do is we need to have public finance. It's starting to get to the point where you're more focused on helping your donors than you are serving the people. And it's a corrosive effect on our politics, on our policy. The average CEO makes 360 times more than their workers. There is no way you can compete with that. Money is not speech, it's money. And in order for the people's voices to reign supreme, politics should be about the issues, not who has the most money in their bank account. Thank you.
I would support the public financing option. I think that folks should go out there and knock doors. Go out there and meet the folks that are going to be your supporters and vote for you. And more specifically, I grew up in a house of 8. We had something called "Say It to My Face." And when I ran for state senate, there was a super PAC that put an ad out there against me because they were concerned that I was going to vote to lower auto insurance, which I would have immediately if it made it to the state senate. They took a picture of me playing paintball gun with my nieces and nephews and said, "Ian Conyers thinks gun violence is a game." No one in the city of Detroit thinks gun violence is a game. I'm a victim of gun violence myself. It's the #1 issue I've worked on. And so specifically, we've got to get the money out of these 501c4s and super PACs where candidates can sit there and act nice and cool and have the businesses that support them do their bidding. Thank you.
So let me start off by saying the majority of my donations have come from people in the 13th Congressional District as well as unions, because I was a union president and have worked closely with the union. But it takes more than money to win an election. Although it takes money because you need things such as yard signs and other things, material to send out to educate the public, so it does take money. But it takes for me to talk to you and to be out there to represent you. So I think that a fair opportunity is something that is needed. And I think that public funding is okay, but corporation funding, I do not support. So I think that you represent your people will vote for you, and sometimes you don't have to worry about having all of that money because it's the vote that counts, not the money that counts.
I too would certainly be willing to be part of a conversation on campaign finance reform, and I know the public financing piece, we figured out a way to do that for our presidential candidates back before they could raise unlimited dark money and bring in money from other countries. So with that said, I can tell you that with my campaign for the 13th Congressional District, just about all the money that we've raised to date has come from people within the state of Michigan. We've also raised most of our money within Southeast Michigan, so I think that that's important as we take a look at our candidates, is where's their money coming from, and what's the meaning behind that money. So I think it's something that we need to take a good look at. I can tell you that when you hear stories about people in cubicles dialing and stuff like that, I don't know about that. I can tell you that probably the hardest part about when you're in office is trying to raise money and asking people for money. It doesn't get any easier the further you go. So just to say that there's people sitting in cubicles just dialing all day trying to raise money, it's not something that I've experienced or something I've seen. So, but I can tell you that it's extremely hard to raise money. It never gets any easier to asking people for money for your campaigns.
So I remember when Citizens United first happened. It's all my father was talking about and how terrible it was. If corporations are people, then why aren't they taking care of their neighbors? Why aren't record profits trickling down to the people, right? So I would support the repeal of the Citizens United decision. And when I personally, as a candidate in this race, when I found out that a so-called grassroots organization like Michigan United used how much money you raise as qualified to be a participant in that debate, it reinforced the notion that money in politics is a problem. So I would absolutely support the repeal of Citizens United, and we need to make sure we clean up the money that is involved in politics?
You know, I am not interested in going to Congress to become a professional fundraiser. And members of Congress absolutely have to, you know, they are required to, or certainly told to, expected to, I should say, spend so many hours, actually 4 hours per day raising money. That is real, that happens. And so I am absolutely in favor of repealing Citizens United. You know, and it's interesting, if you look at the history of campaign finance, both Democrats and Republicans have tried to do something around that issue. So there has been bipartisan legislation that has been introduced, but the problem is that both Democrats and Republicans have both found a way to benefit from these systems that have been set in place. So we have to really look at, you know, what is really important when we look at leadership. I agree with what John just said. You know, money is important, but what's also important is leadership and leadership aptitude. And so we cannot just look at money or how much someone has raised or the lack thereof to determine whether they are fit to be a leader in Congress. And so I believe that it is time to reverse Citizens United and really explore other creative ways for financing campaigns. Congressional campaigns.
The next question will be given 1 minute and 30 seconds, and we'll be starting with Chanel Jackson. In 2009, Congress passed the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act. It was meant to create financial stability and prevent another financial crisis like the banking collapse in 2007. Recently, those crucial reforms were repealed by the conservatives. Do you believe the Dodd-Frank reforms even went far enough? And would you either work to replace them or reinstitute the same reforms?
Thank you for the question. So, you know, at that time I was in the legislature and fighting on the state level for protections for working families. And I was able to do some positive work on issues regarding mortgage foreclosure and some of the other things that we saw families literally losing their shirts through the Great Recession. I thought Dodd-Frank was an excellent beginning for us, and to see Republicans really rip that apart and to destroy the little bit of progress that we got on financial responsibility was disheartening. That said, I do believe that, you know, we've got to figure out what it is. I think that there are like-minded, reasonable Republicans whose constituents in their districts are also dealing with some of the same financial circumstances as the people that we will represent, or I will represent, God willing, in the 13th Congressional District. And so in order to be able to move policy, you've got to build relationships and find out where you can have coalitions. So we want to reinstate Dodd-Frank or something like it. We've got to send a lawmaker to Washington who, one, understands the issue, but two, has the ability and the wherewithal to build the partnerships to actually move that policy. And so yes, I will work to reinstate it, but I'll start with building partnerships with my colleagues who are like-minded. Thank you.
I think that Dodd-Frank is important, but I also think we need a 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. And what I mean by that is basically where we separate commercial banks from investment banks. I also think what we need to do is we need to break the big banks up. I think they've gotten too big. I think it's 4 banks that own more than 60% of the wealth in this country. I also think that we need to make sure that we have more transparency, particularly with high frequency trading, which is going on, which is one of the reasons why we had the financial crash. I also think we need to pass too big to fail, anti-too big to fail legislation. I don't think that we should live in a country where we have private profit and socialized debt. And that's exactly what happened with the banks. I felt that we were going to bail out these financial institutions for their bad decisions, for their illegal decisions, for the way they discriminated against with these loans. You have African Americans that had good credit who still they were giving subprime mortgages to, who basically engaged in a lot of violations of consumer protections. I think it's fundamentally wrong. I think through predatory lending, These are the things that I think that we need to do in terms of the financial system, and that's what I'm going to fight for every day. We need a financial system that is about protecting the consumers, and that's what I'm going to fight for. We also need to encourage more community banks and more community financial institutions as well, and credit unions as well. I think this is something that's going to spur more economic growth and make sure that people will be able to get the loans they need. Thank you.
I think we all know the repeal of Dodd-Frank, just like the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, was about nothing other than getting rid of the legacy of Barack Obama. That's what they've intended to do, and that's what they have done. I absolutely would push to make sure that we've got financial institutions that have the opportunity to give access to capital to all types of people in the community, whether it's a credit union, a microloan. We all know it's about more than just having that savings in the bank, but becoming bankable itself has become out of reach for too many people in this congressional district. That affects your ability to have a car loan, that affects your ability to have a home loan, but sadly we all know that cousin that rents, you might be you yourself, that is locked out of the system and has been specifically targeted. They may pay their rent, doing hair or working at the auto yard for 13 years in a row. They've never missed a payment, but they're not getting credit for that, and they're not able to get continued access to credit for that. It's destructive, and it's about more than making a fair market. It's about destroying the legacy of President Barack Obama. And as a congressperson, I'll work to reinstate those very issues that he worked hard on. And I'm proud as a Democrat to have stood beside them when they had the opportunity to pass that historic legislation, to attack those banks and those predatory lenders that were using the money to give to people and then betting against it on Wall Street. I think it's discriminatory at best, and I think that we need to work hard every day to make sure we've got someone in Washington that will be there to not only keep an eye on this, but to go directly to the source. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Let me say Dodd-Frank was a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done. More needs to be done, and predatory lending must be stopped. The American dream is that everyone wants to own their own, and there should be a way where everyone should be able to own their own. Credit unions needs to be available to all. So I think much must be done. And as a congressperson, I will fight to ensure that you have that right to be able to own your own and have that American dream, and that predatory lending is stopped and more will be done.
Thank you. I think this legislation was the right thing to do. It's just absolutely shameful to think that we're already starting to repeat the same mistakes. I don't think anybody that lives in the 13th congressional district did not get to see close up in their neighborhood, on their street, the devastation of the housing bubble collapse. And when you look at the communities that make up the district, they're still suffering. There's still a lot of those homes, now they're rental homes, and it just had a devastating effect in our communities. So moving forward, and as we start to see property values come back, we're starting to see this more predatory lending coming back. So obviously we haven't learned a lesson. So there's a lot of experts that are saying that we're already on the verge of another housing collapse. So I can tell you that as your representative in Washington, I will make sure that we protect our property owners. We'll make sure we protect our families that they're not taken advantage of with these predatory loans, because like I said, it's had a devastating effect on our neighborhoods, our families, and our communities, and